Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive into a highly unconventional and honestly pretty mind-bending essay by an author named Zhu Feng. We're going to break down a really radical argument he makes. The idea that emotional dependence, the very thing most of us consider the absolute bedrock of human connection, is actually the main thing restricting human civilization. We're going to map out the author's exact arguments step by step. Now, to be clear, we aren't here to take sides or endorse this worldview. We're just here to neutrally unpack this fascinating text and figure out exactly how he constructs such a massive critique of traditional human relationships.
So, let's just get right into it by mapping out the author's problem agitation solution framework. We'll start with the emotional dependence problem, explore his view of the family as a hostage situation, look into the parasite dynamic, examine the path to independence, and wrap up with his advanced civilization model.
All right, Section 1, the emotional dependence problem. To really grasp this radical perspective, we have to start with what the author sees as the root problem holding all of us back.
Sui Feng opens his essay with a super provocative question. He asks, who is really hindering the realization of your ideals and preventing you from becoming independent and free? He is directly challenging you to rethink your closest relationships. I mean, usually if we aren't where we want to be, we blame the economy or society or just bad luck, right? But Sui Feng, he wants us to look inward, right at the people closest to us, and ask if they are actually the ones holding us back. In his definition of the core issue uses very, very specific wording. He describes emotional dependence not as a supportive, beautiful form of love, but literally as a comforting and numbing effect. According to the text, the relationships between parents and kids, spouses, siblings, even masters and disciples, they all fall into this bucket. He argues that the more a person relies on these emotional ties, the more their independent consciousness just sort of fades away. It essentially acts as a numbing agent that completely halts your personal growth and stops you from reaching your true potential.
What's truly wild here is the sheer scale of his claim, 5,000 years. The text asks this sweeping historical question. In nearly 5,000 years of human history, who has actually lived a life of total happiness, joy, freedom, and bliss? His answer? Nobody. Not a single person. And the reason, he argues, isn't war or disease or famine. It's simply that emotional dependence has been blocking the way for the entire history of human civilization.
Which brings us to Section 2, Family as Hostage Situation. This is where he moves from a general critique of emotion to viewing the traditional family framework as a literal system of captivity.
The crucial point Zhu Feng makes here is that the core factor stopping humanity from leveling up into an advanced state of civilization is the institution of marriage and family. Seriously, the text claims that within the family unit, your individual autonomy and freedom are entirely restricted by emotional ties. He describes it as a reciprocal emotional hostage situation. Parents take their children hostage, children take their parents hostage, spouses hold each other hostage. So, instead of a support network, the author sees this giant web of captivity that actively erodes independent thought.
He builds this really interesting inverse competence dynamic to explain how the trap works. Basically, the author argues that both extremes of capability within a family are disastrous. If a parent or spouse is incompetent, they rely heavily on their family, which results in severe emotional hostage-taking. But, on the flip side, if a parent or spouse is super capable and does absolutely everything for the family, the child or partner becomes completely oblivious to their own incompetence. In Zhu Feng's view, whether you're capable or incompetent, the traditional family structure traps you in this destructive dependent cycle. True autonomy? He says it's impossible.
Moving on to Section 3, the parasite dynamic. The author decides to escalate his metaphor here. We aren't just looking at a hostage situation anymore, he actually shifts the language to describe outright parasitism. As emotional dependence grows, the text argues that individuals actually degenerate into parasites. And he brings receipts, pointing to the NEET generation, young people not in education, employment, or training, who are just feeding off their parents. But he totally doesn't stop there. He equally points the finger at older parents who live off their children's support, and spouses who rely entirely on their partners. In his framework, dependency is universally parasitic. It doesn't matter your age or what cultural norms say about familial duty.
He neutrally points out the psychology of this dynamic with a pretty stark observation. Parasites never actually realize they're surviving by draining their host. And it gets worse. When the host inevitably becomes weak or can't provide anymore, the dependent party doesn't show gratitude. Instead, they actively complain and condemn the host. It's a very bleak portrayal of human dependency, basically suggesting that relying on others inherently breeds entitlement, not gratitude.
To really anchor this extreme worldview, the author pulls straight from historical religious texts. He quotes Christ Jesus, who said, "A man's enemies will be the members of his own household." By dropping this heavy, very well-known statement, Shufang is attempting to build a bridge for the reader. He wants to show that this critique of the traditional household isn't some brand new fringe idea, but rather a profound truth that historical figures have touched upon too.
So, Section 4, the path to independence. If the family is the root of all these problems, what exactly is Shufang's proposed path forward? Let's check out the solution.
Well, he proposes a completely radical solution requiring 3 distinct steps. Step 1, let every single person be completely independent. Step 2 is basically the direct result of that independence, stopping the generational transfer of pain. Think about it. If parents and children are entirely independent, their suffering isn't passed back and forth. And finally, step 3 is the ultimate conclusion. Just totally remove the program of marriage and family entirely. The author argues that without these constructs, everyone is born 100% free of interpersonal obligation, and that's how people can finally live happily and blissfully.
Finally, Section 5, the advanced civilization model. What does a utopian, family-free society actually look like according to the text? Because he doesn't just leave this as pure theory.
The author boils his entire thesis down to a stark binary contrast. On one hand, you have our current society. This is defined by emotional dependence, the strict framework of the family, and the cyclical suffering that comes with it. In complete contrast, you have what he calls the 1,000-year world or the second home. This ideal state is defined by absolute independence, a total lack of marriage or family structures, and what he describes as celestial bliss. This comparison is the absolute backbone of his philosophy.
And to prove this isn't just a pipe dream, Shufang points to 2 specific models where he claims this ideology is already realized. First, there's the celestial model, the 1,000-year world in heaven, populated by fully independent celestial beings. But he also points to a real earthly application. It's called the second home living model, created by an organization named Lifechanyuan. According to the text, people living in the second home have massively reduced their suffering, specifically because they abandoned traditional marriage and family constructs, so everyone lives independently and freely.
So we're going to end this explainer with a massive thought experiment inspired directly by his essay. Could absolute independence actually be the key to paradise? Or is emotional connection the very thing that makes us human in the first place? Shufang's text challenges literally everything society teaches us about love, duty, and family, framing them as heavy chains rather than anchors. Does dismantling our emotional ties elevate civilization to a state of bliss like he suggests, or does it just strip away the very essence of our humanity? It is definitely a provocative question to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the text, and I highly encourage you to keep questioning the structures around you.